My name is Sahara Josini. Today, I walk freely through the streets of Istanbul, breathing deeply in the air that no longer carries the weight of fear. But it wasn't always this way. My story began in Tehran, where every step was watched, every gesture measured by invisible eyes that seemed always ready to punish any sign of freedom. I was 19 years old. It was March 2023, when something shifted inside me, or perhaps it was God whispering in the wind. The cherry trees at Tehran University were beginning to bloom, silently defying the rigidity of the regime. Those trees enchanted me. It was as if each fallen petal said, "There is still beauty. There is still hope." I was studying Persian literature, immersed in the words of poets who dared to sing of love and freedom in times as difficult, if not more so, than mine. That day, like so many others, I walked across the university's central courtyard with my books clutched to my chest. The sky was clear, and a gentle breeze began to blow. In an instant, my hijab came loose, and before I knew it, my hands had pulled it away from my face. It was quick, but in that moment, my hair, loose in the morning sun, felt like a scream, a cry for something greater, and that's when everything stopped. I didn't see her coming. Fatima Karimi. Everyone at the university knew her. She was one of those people who used religion as a weapon, denouncing colleagues as if it made her more holy. She saw me, and saw what she wanted to see. In her hoarse, cutting voice, she shouted my name across the courtyard. "Sarah Josini, you're showing off. Your behavior is immoral, provocative." That sentence spread like wildfire. The faces around me suddenly turned. Some looked at me with shock, others with judgment, and others simply walked away, afraid they'd be next. I tried to explain. I swear I did. But the words wouldn't come out. All I could manage was a whisper. It was the wind. Even so, I knew it didn't matter. Not to her, not to the system. Fatima smiled, that cold smile that only someone who feeds on the pain of others can give. And then, I understood. My fate was already sealed. It didn't take long. Less than an hour later, the Basij guards were on campus. I hid in the library, trying to blend in with the books, as if the poems I loved so much could protect me. But they found me. Their leader looked at me as if he had already decided the verdict. His hard face, gray beard, eyes that didn't seek truth, only a victim. "Josini, you will be taken away. You are being accused of fasad filars, corruption in the land." Those words still echo in my memory, like the bells of a sentence that almost destroyed my life. Corruption on earth. All because of one moment. One moment when my hair touched the wind, and the wind dared to touch my soul. Corruption on earth. Those words fell upon me like a thunderbolt, heavy, vague, yet frighteningly final. It could mean anything, or nothing. It could mean prison, torture, perhaps something worse. When I rose from the table, my legs felt like they were made of paper. The books I was holding slipped from my hands and fell with a dull thud, as if the sound sealed my fate. The walk to the Basij van seemed endless. Each step was a punishment. The silence of the courtyard screamed louder than any words could. The gazes of my classmates followed me from behind, hard, shocked, some even with tears in their eyes, especially the girls, who knew, tomorrow it could be any of them. No one dared say anything. No one, not a whisper in my defense. Arriving home, my mother was already waiting for me at the door. Saab, always so calm, so full of tenderness, was unrecognizable. She had received the call from the university before me. Her gaze, which had always enveloped me with love, now held something that broke my heart, fear and shame, deep, painful. "How could you do this to us, Sarah?" she asked. There was no scream, just the dry pain crawling in her throat. "How could you bring this dishonor into our home?" I wanted to answer. I swear I did. I wanted to say it was just a moment, a distraction, a thirst for freedom that even I didn't quite understand. But what could I say that would make sense to her? When my father arrived later that night, the weight of humiliation had already transformed him. Ahmad, a simple, hard-working man who had spent decades faithfully serving the Ministry of Education, now bore the weariness on his face of someone who had seen everything he had built crumble. "Because of me, tomorrow you will go to the religious court," he said. His voice wasn't his. It was cold, cutting. "You will beg for mercy. Accept whatever they decide. It's the only chance to save our family's honor." That night, lying in my room, I stared out the window at the murky Tehran sky. The stars, dim and distant, seemed as unreachable as freedom. For the first time, I knew true fear. Not the fleeting fear, but the kind that clings to your skin and chest, making you feel like life as you knew it is over, and that nothing will ever be the same again. The religious court was located in the heart of Tehran, a massive gray building designed to intimidate. The walls seemed to absorb even the sunlight, plunging everything into an oppressive gloom. I went with my parents, who could barely lift their eyes from the floor. Embarrassment was almost a third companion. The room was simple, bare. Only the words of the Quran, in gold calligraphy on the walls, provided some contrast to that soulless place. Everything there seemed to remind you of how small you are, and how, in a few minutes, your life can be judged without anyone truly listening to your heart. 3 men, seated behind a raised table, watched me with the cruel calm of those who had judged dozens like me. Their white robes gleamed in the pale light, reminiscent of crowns that didn't bless, only condemn. Their eyes, dark and severe, seemed to be trying to wring from my soul confessions I had never made, not even to myself. The head of the court, an elderly Ayatollah with a beard as long and white as snow on the rooftops of Borsay, began speaking in a voice that carried centuries of tradition and authority. It sounded like an echo of generations of women who had always told them where they should be and where they shouldn't. Sarah Hosseini, daughter of Ahmad Hosseini, you stand before this court accused of acts that violate public morals and the sacred laws of Islam. My legs were barely holding me up. I was wearing a black chador my mother had given me that morning, my eyes filled with pain. Each word from that old man seemed to crush me a little more. Then a scribe, his voice devoid of emotion, began to read the formal charges, and with each sentence, the atmosphere in the room grew more suffocating. Intentional display of hair, seductive behavior in a public setting, facade fil ars, words that seemed to come from an old book, but that now decided the course of my life. "Do you acknowledge these accusations?" asked the Ayatollah, staring at me with eyes so cold they made me shiver. My voice barely cracked. It was the same phrase I'd been repeating, like a mantra, ever since that day. It wasn't on purpose. It was just the wind. A dry laugh escaped the old religious man's lips, filling the room with a hollow sound, like dead leaves being dragged across the floor. The wind does not discover a pious woman. The wind only reveals what already exists in the heart: desire, vanity, intention to seduce. Then they called witnesses. Fatima Karimi was the first. She approached with a strange glint in her eyes, a small restrained smile. She seemed pleased to be there. Her words were sharp as knives. She said I had looked provocatively at my classmates, that I had smiled, that I had walked in an inappropriate manner. Lies, all of them, but told with such conviction that they almost seemed true. From my seat, I saw my parents huddled in the pews. My father squeezed his eyes shut, as if he wished he could disappear. My mother kept her head down, her face hidden behind her veil, sinking deeper and deeper into shame. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up shakily. The words came out as if I were struggling for breath in a deep, lightless well. "Honorable judges," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a student, devout. My family has always followed the faith zealously. What happened was an accident, just a moment. I never intended to corrupt or attract anyone." The silence that followed was worse than screams. The 3 men lowered their heads and whispered to each other, as if they were choosing a dinner menu, not a life's destiny. The Ayatollah stood up. His voice now seemed to come from far away, not because of its volume, but because of the weight with which it hit my chest. "Sarah Hosseini, this court declares that your conduct poses a threat to morality and social order. As such, you must be corrected and closely monitored." I stopped breathing. "She will be given in marriage to the Venerable Josin Rahimi, Mullah of the Kermanshah region, who, in his generosity, agreed to guide her spiritually and ensure her moral rectitude." My world fell apart. Kermanshah, a distant land, deep in the mountains, where traditions didn't just weigh more heavily, they suffocated. And Josin Rahimi, I'd heard his name whispered among the girls at the university. A rigid man, rigorous, unforgiving. The sentence was clear. My body and my freedom would be handed over to a stranger in the name of moral reform. But inside me, while everyone around me lowered their eyes in resignation, something different began to blossom. It wasn't courage yet, but it was the beginning of it. A man of about 60 years old, known throughout the region for his relentless severity and brutally rigid interpretation of Islamic law, his name alone was enough to silence entire rooms. When I heard him, I couldn't contain myself. The words escaped my lips before I even realized it. Please don't. But the verdict was already sealed. Irrevocable. In 2 weeks, I would become Josin Rahimi's wife. Just enough time to seal the legal documents. But not to run away. Not to breathe. They called it mercy. A second chance. But it was just prison dressed in a white veil. A sentence disguised as redemption. The moment the Ayatollah finished announcing the decision, my mother collapsed. The sound of her body hitting the marble echoed like a muffled thunderclap, shattering the oppressive silence of the room. My father ran to her in despair. Her face was the very picture of death, and I stood there, motionless, not crying, not screaming, not even able to feel my own body. It was as if my soul had left me along with the last breeze of that damned courtroom. The days that followed were a blur, a nightmare that dragged me awake. My mother became a shadow of her former self. She spent hours murmuring, sometimes blaming me for the entire tragedy, other times sobbing like a lost child. My father completely withdrew. He didn't say a word. He just stared at me like someone observing something broken, as if he didn't know what to do with the pieces. Meanwhile, the neighbors took over the house. They arrived in droves, full of haste and feigned pity. They helped with the trousseau, sewing clothes I'd never chosen, folding sheets as if they were preparing me for a funeral. "It's the best for her," I murmured. "An older man will know how to guide her, show her the right path." The day before my trip to Kermanshah, I sat alone in my room, surrounded by suitcases full of clothes that spoke nothing of me. I looked in the mirror and was startled. That wasn't me anymore. The sunken, dull eyes, the pale, tired face, and the lips, dry, silent, as if they had forgotten what it was to smile. I opened the drawer and took out the small diary I'd kept hidden since I was a teenager. My words over the years were there. Dreams, poems, silent prayers, and now, my farewell. I wrote with trembling hands, "Tomorrow I will no longer be Sarah. Tomorrow I will belong to a man I've never seen, in a city I never wanted. If anyone ever finds this, know that here lived a girl who just wanted to be free. It wasn't corruption. It was thirst for air." I carefully closed the notebook and hid it under my mattress, a final gesture of resistance, a sign, in case anyone ever cared to look. The journey to Kermanshah was a silent descent into hell. My father drove his old Paykan through the mountain curves. The snow on the distant peaks seemed to watch us, cold, silent, as if even the heavens witnessed my doom. With every mile, I felt the distance between who I was and who I would have to become widened to the breaking point. When we finally arrived, Josin Rahimi's house loomed on the horizon like a shadow, a gray stone fortress, tall, enclosed, surrounded by walls topped with barbed wire that glinted in the setting sun. Everything about it screamed control, isolation, silence imposed. It was the end of the road, and the beginning of my captivity. The house's garden seemed more like a memorial than a place of life. The rose bushes were pruned so precisely that they lost all their charm. The lined cypresses resembled silent, somber, immobile guards. Everything there was symmetry, control, rigidity, a perfect setting for the soul that would be imprisoned within. Josin Rahimi was waiting for me at the entrance. He wore an impeccable beige robe, and his white turban gleamed in the late afternoon light like a crown of dominance. His well-groomed beard and small, calculating eyes examined me as if I were a newly arrived item in his inventory. And he was looking for flaws. "Peace be upon you," he said in a firm, deep voice, full of religious authority. "Welcome to your new home, Sarah. Here you will learn the true meaning of obedience." The ceremony that sealed our union was anything but a wedding. It was an empty performance, where even the looks seemed rehearsed. The imam recited blessings, and I just sat there, wrapped in a white dress that looked more like a shroud. There was no joy, no singing, no smiles, just mechanical words about duty and submission. My mother cried constantly, but it wasn't sadness. It was exhaustion, relief. She had saved her daughter from the scandal. My father shook Josin's hand with cold seriousness, as if giving something valuable in exchange for peace. As if to say, "Now it is your responsibility. May Allah free us from this burden." When all the guests had left, I was left alone in the place they now called my new home. But everything about it screamed otherwise. The rooms were dry, soulless. The walls bore only gilded frames with verses from the Quran and meticulously lined prayer rugs. Nothing there belonged to me. Not even the air. There was no music, no books, other than religious ones. No sign that there might be laughter, memories, or life there. Joseon led me through every corner of the house like someone training a newly arrived animal. She pointed out the spaces, the rules, the schedules, the boundaries. Everything was said with surgical coldness. You will wake up at dawn to prepare my coffee. Your prayers will take place 5 times a day in this room. You will not leave the house without my permission. And if you do, it will be with me. You won't talk to strangers, especially not men. Your role here is to serve Allah by serving your husband. My room was upstairs, a small dark space with a window overlooking the inner courtyard. The walls were bare except for a painting with a phrase in gold Arabic that hit me like a slap. Men are superior to women, for Allah made them so. Those words were like eyes watching me day and night, reminding me that in that place, I wasn't a person, I was a function, a silent, obedient presence. The first night was the longest of my life. After prayers, Joseon entered the room. She didn't say anything. She didn't look at me affectionately. She simply approached with the same authority she displayed when giving orders during the day. There, in that colorless, soulless, witnessless room, he exercised his rights, those guaranteed to him by law, religion, and society. There was no tenderness, no seeking of connection. There was only control. It was as if my pain didn't matter, as if my presence was just a body to be molded, possessed, corrected. That night, lying in the dark, my body aching and my soul in ruins, I said a silent prayer, not to Allah, but to a God who might be beyond those walls, beyond it all. A God who wouldn't see me as impure, rebellious, or unworthy. A God who would call me his daughter. When he finally left the room that first night, I let my body sink into the bed as if I could disappear into it. I wrapped myself in the rough sheets, crying soundlessly, trying not to exist. Through the window, the pale moon watched my silent lament, my only witness in this new life that had been forced upon me. But it was on the 3rd day that something changed. I was in the kitchen, preparing morning theme tutino, fingers trembling, still trying to learn the unspoken rules of that house, when I heard light footsteps behind me. I turned, startled, and came face to face with a young woman with huge, lively eyes that seemed to clash violently with the colorless atmosphere of that place. Her hijab was a little askew, revealing a few strands of light brown hair, and there was a quiet fortitude about her, as if the world had tried to break her and she had learned to resist invisibly. You must be my father's new wife, he said, in a low but sure voice. I am Maryam, his daughter. I nodded slightly, not daring to speak. Joseon had been clear. Conversations were to be avoided, especially with family members. Too many words corrupt, he'd said. But Maryam seemed oblivious to that. She seemed different. She moved a little closer, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. You don't need to be afraid of me. I know what it's like to feel trapped in here. That sentence shot through my chest like a warm wave amidst the constant cold. In her eyes, there was something deeper than pity. There was understanding, a spark of humanity. For the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone. How long have you lived here? I ventured to ask, my voice almost imperceptible. She sighed and smiled sadly. All my life, but I learned that even in the darkest places, you can find a ray of light if you know where to look. Before I could understand what she meant, Joseon's firm, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. In an instant, Maryam changed. She straightened, lowered her gaze, and became the submissive daughter he'd expected. When he entered the kitchen, his eyes quickly scanned the scene. Why so much whispering? He asked, his voice thick with suspicion. I was just explaining where the spices for the tea are, Maryam replied, with the exact calm of someone who already knew the game. Her eyes fixed on the ground, her voice measured. Joseon grunted in approval and left, but before she disappeared, she gave me a look that needed no words. I'm watching you. That night, lying alone under the thin quilt, I thought of Maryam, of her words about light hidden in dark corners. I didn't know exactly what she meant, but something inside me shifted. It was fragile, almost imperceptible, but it felt like hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doomed to live forever as a shadow inside that house. The weeks that followed were a marathon of silence and obedience. Each day began before sunrise. I prepared Joseon's coffee under his stern gaze. Then came endless hours of cleaning, prayer, and what he called spiritual formation, sessions in which he read verse after verse about submission, silence, purity, and chastity. He ruled the house like a war general. Nothing escaped his control. My gaze, my words, even the way I sat or folded my hands. Everything was observed, corrected, molded. Every gesture was watched. Every breath was measured. And yet sometimes he would pass Miriam in the hallways, always silent, but with that same look that spoke louder than 1,000 words. You're still somebody, even here. Yet amid the suffocating monotony of that house, Miriam became my only window to hope. Our encounters were furtive, brief as the flutter of a bird's wings, stolen minutes in the kitchen while her father was at the mosque, whispered conversations in the garden, hanging out laundry, knowing glances exchanged when Jocelyn monopolized the meals with her endless sermons. As time passed, I began to realize that Miriam didn't fit the mold of the pious daughter her father required. Her prayers seemed mechanical. Her eyes wandered distractedly during her father's tedious speeches. There were moments when she thought no one was watching, her expression would change, a distant glow, a spiritual longing hard to describe, as if she were searching for something far beyond this life. On a mild April afternoon, as I watered the roses in the courtyard, Miriam slowly approached. The sweet scent of newly bloomed flowers mingled with the fresh spring air, and for a brief moment, I almost felt free. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "Can I ask you a personal question?" I nodded, intrigued by the unusual tone. "Have you ever felt like Allah was far away? Like your prayers were rising to heaven but never answered?" The audacity of the question surprised me. In a house where unshakable faith was the law, admitting doubts was like walking a tightrope. But there was something in Miriam's eyes that made me trust. "Yes," I whispered, looking around to make sure we were alone. "I feel like I'm screaming into a bottomless pit." She nodded, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding. "I've felt this way for years. Since I was a child, something inside me has been searching. Something more, something real. Like this?" I asked, still hesitant, although a part of me already suspected the answer. Miriam glanced at the house, checking that Jocelyn hadn't returned. Then she moved closer. "I have studied other things, other forms of faith," said in a conspiratorial whisper, "and I found something I think you should know about." My heart raced. "Miriam, this is dangerous. If Jocelyn finds out, I know what could happen." But she stared at me with a determination I had never seen before. "I believe God brought us together for a reason. He wants you to know something important." That night, after Jocelyn finished her prayers and retired to her study, Miriam knocked softly on my bedroom door. I let her in, hands shaking as I closed the door behind her. "I've been praying for this for weeks," he whispered, asking God to show me if I should share this with you. From within the black cloth she brought, she removed a carefully wrapped object. My hands trembled as I touched it, immediately recognizing the weight and familiar texture. A book. What I held in my hands was something forbidden. A Bible. Miriam handed me the book wrapped in a black cloth, her eyes shining with an emotion I hadn't felt in a long time. "I received it from a Christian 2 years ago," she told me quietly. "Since then, my life has never been the same." As my hands touched the leather cover, I felt a strange calm invade my chest, a peace I hadn't experienced in months. That simple object, so dangerous to us, seemed to hold the promise of something greater, something true. "How did you manage this?" I asked, still afraid. She looked around, making sure no one was listening, and replied, "Here in Kermanshah, there's a group of Christians who meet secretly. They study, pray together, and support each other." Miriam told me about the Christian woman who found her crying in the market, comforted her, and introduced her to Jesus. "Do you really believe?" I asked, feeling the weight of the risk we were taking just by talking about it. She squeezed my hands, firm and full of faith. "Since I met Jesus, I feel like my prayers finally reach someone who truly listens to me, who loves me for who I am, not for what I do." That night, alone in my room, clutching the book to my chest, I felt for the first time since I arrived here that I wasn't entirely alone. The words of the gospel whispered a new hope, a light I hadn't seen in a long time. I opened the book slowly, flipping through its pages reverently. In Persian script, I read something that touched my heart. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." I didn't understand it all yet, but something inside me knew I had found a truth worth seeking. The following days were divided between the weight of my real life and the secret I kept. By day, I was the obedient wife, fulfilling all the orders and rituals Jocelyn demanded. But when night fell, and the house fell silent, I transformed. In the dim light of the lantern, hidden under a loose floorboard, I read the Bible, discovering a new world, a refuge for my weary soul. It was a double life, hard and full of fear, but also full of hope. The hope that, even in the deepest shadows, it is possible to find a light capable of transforming everything. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of confusion. The names seemed strange, the customs didn't make sense, and the culture I encountered in the pages of the Bible was so far removed from my own reality that I nearly lost my way. But through it all, there was something in Jesus' words that pulled me in, like a calling I couldn't ignore. He didn't speak with the harshness I was used to. He didn't use threats or instill fear. On the contrary, his words carried a tenderness I'd never seen in any religious text before. One night, while reading the Sermon on the Mount, I stopped before verses that touched me deeply. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Silent tears streamed down my face. It was as if those words had been written for me, for a weary soul, a woman crying, broken inside, thirsting for justice in a world that seemed designed to crush the weak. Miriam came to visit me whenever she could, always with some excuse, a recipe, help in the kitchen. In these stolen moments, we shared our secrets and doubts in whispers, like two conspirators against despair. She had already been walking with this new faith for 2 years, and she became my guide, explaining difficult passages and revealing how Jesus' love had transformed her life. You know what surprises me most? She confided in me during one of these encounters. Jesus never treated women as if they were inferior. He spoke to the Samaritan woman at the well, defended the woman accused of adultery, and allowed Mary to sit at his feet to learn. In his kingdom, we are all equal. These words resonated deeply within me. I grew up believing that my worth depended on my obedience, first to my father, then to my husband. The idea that I could have value simply by being who I am, without having to serve or obey, was revolutionary and frightening. One night, while reading chapter 8 of the Gospel of John, I came across the story of the woman caught in adultery. The Pharisees dragged her before Jesus, demanding that she be stoned, according to the law. But his answer stopped me in my tracks. Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. Lying in bed, holding the flashlight that trembled in my hands, I thought of the brutal contrast. Here was a man before a woman judged and condemned by everyone. He didn't humiliate her. He didn't condemn her. On the contrary, he protected her dignity when her accusers retreated in shame. And then he said something that echoed in my soul. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. At that moment, I remembered my own sentence, the public humiliation, the life imposed on me as punishment for something that many would call a mistake, but which for me was simply the desire to breathe freely. The distance between the cold justice of men and the profound mercy of Jesus seemed immense, like an unbridgeable ocean. But it was when I came to John 14:6 that everything inside me suddenly changed. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. These words hit me like a shock. All my life, I had been taught that there were many paths to God, that all religions had their value, and that Christians, though people of the book, had lost their way. But there was Jesus, speaking with a firmness and exclusivity I had never heard. He was the only way. My mind, shaped by Islam, initially rejected this idea. How could a man, even a prophet, say something so absolute? But gradually, as I read more and more, I began to realize that Jesus didn't just speak like an ordinary man. The scriptures revealed that he was the Son of God, God incarnate, Emmanuel, God with us. One night, about 2 months after I had the book in my hands, something happened that I will never forget. I was reading Matthew 11:28, where Jesus says, Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. At that moment, something inside me broke. A relief so great it felt like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. All the fear, all the guilt I'd been carrying, all the hopelessness that had suffocated me, it all seemed to suddenly dissolve. For the first time in a long time, I took a deep breath and felt true peace. I whispered my first prayer to Jesus, my heart heavy and filled with hope. Jesus, If you really are who the Bible says you are, if you can really give me rest, I need you. I'm tired, broken, lost. Please help me. I didn't hear voices or see lights, but I felt something I can only call love, a soft, welcoming presence filling my small, dark room. Tears streamed silently down my face. For the first time, I felt that God saw me, not as broken, dirty, or worthless, but as loved, exactly as I was. The days that followed were different. My life was still that prison, still trapped with a harsh man and a soulless house, but something inside me had changed forever. I had hope. I had a real bond with God. I had a reason to keep going, to resist. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. Every page I read, every prayer I said, every moment of peace moved me further away from Islam and closer to a faith that I knew could cost me everything. A question began to hammer inside my head, simple and terrifying. Would I be willing to risk my life for this truth? Then, one morning, while I was preparing Josen's breakfast, Miriam walked into the kitchen. Her face was more serious than usual. She waited until we were alone, then leaned in and whispered urgently, "Sarah, I think it's time for you to think about leaving here." My heart raced at those words. "What do you mean, escape?" Miriam held me tight and said, "There are people who can help, Christians who help women like you escape. But you have to be determined, fully committed, because once you take that step, there's no turning back." I looked out the window, observing the high walls surrounding the house, like invisible prisons. Beyond, the imposing mountains seemed like natural barriers, separating me from what I could hardly call freedom. The choice Miriam asked of me wasn't just a physical escape. It was a decision to abandon everything I knew, my identity, my faith, to embrace a whole new life. Trembling, I asked, "How long do I have to decide?" "Not really," she replied with a serious look. "My father is talking about taking you to visit his brother in an even more isolated town. If that happens, it will be almost impossible to help you." That night, alone in my room, with the Bible open in my trembling hands, I prayed with a fervor I had never felt before. "Jesus, show me what to do. If you are truly the way, the truth, and the life, give me the courage to follow you, no matter the cost." The answer came from a verse in Matthew 10:39 that I had never noticed. "Whoever seeks to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." It was as if heaven itself spoke to me. In that instant, I knew my decision was made. I needed to leave behind the life I knew to find the true life Jesus promised. I had no idea, however, of the danger that awaited me, dangers that would test my faith and courage as never before. The escape planning began with furtive conversations in dark corners of the house. Miriam was my lifeline, my link to a new world of hope and freedom. "There's a network," she explained quietly, as we pretended to hang laundry in the backyard. "Christians who help people like you. They have secret routes, contacts at the border, but one false step, and we'll all be in danger." This network had been set up by Iranian Christians who had managed to flee to Turkey. They operated with complete discretion, using codes and signals to communicate. The contact happened almost invisibly. A carpet seller, unremarkable to anyone, appeared at our door. Miriam offered him tea, and he discreetly slipped her a note. That night, Miriam showed me the message. "The new moon brings new opportunities. The rose garden will soon bloom." It was the code. The operation was scheduled for the new moon, in 3 days. My heart was racing so fast I feared Josen might hear. I maintained my routine throughout the day, acting normally, while my mind raced with plans and strategies. The Bible remained hidden, but each verse I memorized was like a silent prayer that strengthened me. The chosen night finally arrived. The sky was overcast, perfect for escape. Josen had taken her sleeping pill, and heavy snoring filled the house. At 2 a.m, I heard a soft knock on the door. It was Miriam. "It's time," Miriam whispered, her voice almost a breath. I dressed in black clothes, silent as the night, and carefully tied my backpack. The Bible was wrapped in a worn canvas, along with the little money I'd managed to save, and a small photo of the family I was leaving behind. Everything he knew was there, behind, forever. We left like shadows, silently, barefoot so as not to leave a trace. Miriam led me to the back wall, where the stones had been removed, creating a hidden passage. "This is where we say goodbye," she whispered, squeezing my shoulders tightly. "Follow the trail north. It's 2 kilometers to an abandoned cabin. You'll see a red mark on the door. Wait there. And Sarah, When they find out you helped me, do you know what will happen to me? Jesus will take care of you, I replied, though fear gripped my chest. And how will he care for you? Go now. I crawled through the narrow hole, the rocks scratching my clothes and skin, until I finally emerged on the other side, feeling the cool dawn air on my skin. I looked back once, at the place that still held the scent of the house that imprisoned me, and then looked ahead, at the slope that awaited me. The walk was a nightmare. Every shadow seemed to hide a guard. Every noise could be the end. My feet burned on the sharp stones, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the fear that consumed me. Finally, the hut appeared exactly where Miriam had said, frail and nearly crumbling, with the red paint on the door the only sign of hope. I went inside and huddled, shivering, praying that morning would come quickly, or that someone would show up before I was too alone. The hours passed like an eternity, between whispered prayers and memorized verses, clinging to Jesus' promise that he would be with me until the end. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the crack in the door, I heard footsteps outside. My heart nearly stopped. The door opened slowly, and a middle-aged woman with kind, steady eyes entered. "Sarah, is that you?" she asked with a soft smile. "Yes," I managed to reply, my voice weak. "My name is Nasrin. I've come to take you to safety." The next 24 hours were a silent race through mountain trails. Nasrin knew every secret path, every hiding place. We walked at night and rested during the day, always hidden, always alert. During a break in a cold cave, Nasrin told me her story. She had been a mullah, a scholar of the Quran, until she found the faith that changed her life and fled. "Aren't you afraid?" I asked, amazed. "Of course I do," she replied. "But fear can't control my life when I'm doing God's work." On the second day, as we approached Lorestau, the danger increased. Military outposts appeared more frequently, and we were forced to seek even more hidden routes, avoiding any signs that might give us away. It was at this part of the journey, when the mountains rose imposingly like silent giants between captivity and freedom, that the greatest danger met us. We walked along nearly invisible trails, our feet bruised, too tired to feel the night chill. Suddenly, Nasrin stopped and raised her hand, indicating absolute silence. "Patrol," he whispered, his eyes scanning the valley below where flashlights danced in a meticulous pattern. My blood ran cold. I knew what that meant. Armed soldiers, dogs trained to sniff out any human presence, and tracking technology that could find us even in the dark. One misstep could be fatal. I held my breath and clung to the faith that sustained me. "Jesus, I trust in you. We have to find another way," Nasrin murmured, but there was a weight in her voice that told me how much time was against us. We spent the next 6 hours huddled in a crevice between massive boulders, motionless as statues, while the patrol's spotlight swept the mountain dangerously close to where we were hiding. The night's chill seemed to cut to the bone, and our clothes weren't enough protection. But we couldn't even think about moving to keep warm. I stood there, silent, repeating Psalm 23 in my mind, that promise I'd memorized. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." When the lights finally faded, and the sounds of soldiers faded into the mountains, Nasrin led me on an even more perilous route, a narrow, unstable trail that skirted a sheer drop, a cliff that seemed to plummet into the abyss. "Hold on to the rock tightly," she warned me, her voice firm. "Don't look down, just follow my steps." The biting wind nearly tore me off the trail, and more than once my boots trod on loose stones that fell into the void, making noises that seemed to echo throughout the night, chilling my soul. But miraculously, after 2 hours of walking with our hearts in our throats, we managed to cross the cliff. Dawn on the 4th day found us in territory Nasrin recognized as the last border zone. Ahead of us, a wide valley opened up, marking the unofficial border between Iran and Turkey. It was an area patrolled occasionally, but not constantly. Nasrin pointed to a cluster of low hills in the distance. "You'll go on alone from here," she said, her gaze mingling sadness and determination. "Further north, about 10 kilometers away, there's a Turkish checkpoint. When you get there, ask for the religious message. Tell them you're a Christian convert fleeing persecution. They'll know what to do." "Aren't you coming with me?" My voice was tense, fear tightening my chest at the thought of continuing alone. "My work ends here," he replied with a sad smile. "I have others to help in Iran, but you are leaving for your new life. Jesus brought you this far, and he will carry you to the end." Before leaving, she hugged me tightly and took a small wooden cross from her backpack, simple but full of meaning. "This is to remind you that you're never alone," she said, placing it in my trembling hands. Watching Nasrin walk away, returning to danger to help others, was one of the most difficult and inspiring moments of my journey. This brave woman had risked everything to save me. The final walk to the Turkish border felt almost unreal. For the first time in days, I walked in the sunshine, feeling the warmth of approaching freedom. Even though I was still on Iranian soil, each step took me away from the prison that imprisoned me, to a place where I could live my faith without fear. All around me, nature seemed to conspire to give me strength. Rolling green hills, crystal clear streams flowing between the rocks, wildflowers painting the countryside with vivid colors. But the loneliness weighed heavily. I was alone, without maps, without communication, guided only by the instructions Nasrin had given me and the faith that now sustained me. More than once, I lost my way and had to turn back, wasting precious hours and consuming the last of my remaining strength. But when I finally saw the Turkish flags fluttering in the distance over what was clearly a border crossing, at the end of the 5th day of my escape, my legs almost gave out as relief washed over me. After days of constant fear, imminent danger, and seemingly endless walks, I had finally reached free territory. But even though I had crossed that invisible line separating prison from freedom, my troubles weren't over yet. As I approached the checkpoint, Turkish soldiers suddenly appeared, guns pointed at me, shouting orders in a language I didn't understand. In desperation, I threw myself to the ground, raised my hands, and shouted in Farsi, "Asylum! Christian! Religious asylum!" The next few minutes were a whirlwind of hurried voices and suspicious looks as I remained in custody, waiting to find out what would happen. Then, finally, an officer who spoke some Farsi approached and began asking me simple questions. My name, where I was from, why I was seeking refuge. I took a deep breath and said, with a clarity that even surprised me, "I am a Christian. I converted from Islam and was forced to marry a mullah. If they send me back, I will die." The silence that followed was heavy as he studied my face. After a few minutes, he made a radio call. 20 minutes later, a woman entered the station. She introduced herself as a translator and investigator of religious asylum cases. "Tell me your story," she asked, speaking perfect Farsi. Sitting on a plastic chair in that remote corner of the border, with the sun setting behind the mountains I had crossed, I poured out everything: my crime at the university, the forced marriage, Miriam and the Bible, my conversion and my desperate escape. When I finished, I saw tears in the woman's eyes. "You have traveled a journey full of dangers for your faith," he said tenderly. "Welcome to Turkey. No one here will force you to deny Jesus." Those words rang in my soul like bells of freedom. For the first time, I was in a place where I could praise the God I loved, where I could read the Bible without fear and pray in Jesus' name without the shadow of persecution. That night, in a temporary refugee center in the border town of Dubasud, I knelt beside a simple fold-out bed. I prayed the truest prayer of my life. "Jesus, you brought me out of Egypt as you led the Israelites. You led me through the desert as you led your people. Now teach me to live as your free daughter." The answer to that prayer came the next day, when I met the Turkish Christian community, which soon became my new spiritual family. The first few days in that center were an intense mix of relief and confusion. After years under oppressive control, being able to make simple choices felt like a gift, but it also brought fear and uncertainty. Each step in that new life was simultaneously liberating and frightening. The center was filled with stories similar to mine: Yazidis fleeing the terror of ISIS, Assyrian Christians who saw their churches destroyed, and Muslim converts who, for the first time, decided to follow Jesus, even knowing the risks. I was not alone in this journey of faith and sacrifice. The social worker accompanying me, a Turkish woman named Aisha, calmly explained the procedures for applying for religious asylum. "The process can be long," she warned. "Months, maybe years. But in the meantime, you're safe here." That word, safe, sounded strange after so long living in fear. The feeling of security came gradually, in small moments that, together, began to form a new river of hope in my life. On the first Sunday after arriving, Aishi, a friend from the community, invited me to the local church. My heart skipped a beat at the invitation. "Is it really safe?" I asked, still gripped by the remnants of the fear I'd carried for so long. He smiled and assured me, "Here in Turkey, religious freedom is protected by law." The Armenian Evangelical Church of Duos was simple, modest, none of the grand golden domes I'd imagined of religious buildings. But when I first walked through the door, I felt something new, a profound peace I'd never experienced in a mosque. The air seemed charged with love and serenity. Pastor Armin welcomed me with a warm hug that immediately brought tears to my eyes. "Sister," he said in carefully enunciated Fars, "you've come home." The service was unlike anything I'd ever seen. No complicated rituals, intimidating hierarchies, or fear. Instead, there were soul-lifting songs, sincere prayers, and teachings on God's unconditional love. When Armin spoke about the prodigal son, the young man who wandered away from his father and was welcomed back with a feast, I felt as if the parable told my own story. During the group prayer, with dozens of voices joining in, I closed my eyes and felt the presence of Jesus so close I could almost touch him. "I want to be baptized," I told Armin after the service. The words came straight from my heart, before I could even think. His eyes lit up. "Are you sure, daughter? Baptism is a serious step, especially for someone from where you come from." "I'm sure," I replied firmly. Jesus freed me from a life of slavery, and I wanted to publicly declare that I belonged to him. The following week, I studied with Armen, delving deeper into what it truly meant to follow Jesus. I discovered the Trinity in a way that finally made sense, learned that salvation is by grace, not works, and grasped the promise of eternal life that comes from true faith. On the day of my baptism, the small church was packed with Christian refugees who had come to celebrate with me. Seeing those faces, people who understood exactly what I had left behind, filled me with an emotion I can't explain. Armin led me to the small baptismal pool, hidden behind the altar, and there my new life in Christ truly began. As I dove into that cool water, I felt as if I were stepping into the Jordan River alongside Jesus. In a solemn yet joyful voice, Sarah Josini asked me, "Do you confess that Jesus is the Son of God, who died for your sins and rose again to give you eternal life?" With tears in my eyes, I answered clearly and firmly, "Yes, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and I am baptized in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." As I was immersed, a profound feeling washed over me, as if all the chains that bound me to the past had been broken once and for all. The woman who emerged from that water was no longer the Sarah who feared judgment for showing her hair to the wind, nor the terrified wife of a cruel mullah. I was a new creation in Christ, freed to worship, love, and fully live the purpose God had prepared for me. As I emerged from the water, the congregation sang "Amazing Grace" in Farsi, their voices rising like a song of victory. The words spoke directly to my heart. I had been lost, but now I was found. The months that followed were filled with intense spiritual growth and profound emotional healing. I attended Bible studies where I was finally able to express all the doubts and questions I had been carrying, but the challenges didn't completely disappear. Nightmares of the escape still haunted me, and the guilt of leaving Miriam behind gnawed at me. That's when pastoral counseling entered my life as an indispensable support. Armin helped me understand that trauma takes time to heal, and that survivor's guilt is a common struggle. "God saved you for a purpose, Sarah," he told me. "Your story doesn't end with escape. In fact, it's just beginning." Months later, I received news that changed everything. A human rights activist contacted me to talk about Miriam. My heart sank when I heard her name. "Your friend was arrested 3 months after your escape, accused of aiding you and possessing Christian literature," she said. "But there's good news. Miriam was released last week, early release for good behavior." That afternoon, the message I'd been waiting for arrived. It was from Miriam. She was alive, free, and even behind bars, she had ministered to other women in prison. Her suffering was not in vain. She had led 3 women to Christ during their time together. Knowing that Miriam not only survived, but flourished spiritually, renewed my hope and strength. Her courage, which had driven me to flee, now inspired me to live with greater purpose. A year after my baptism, my asylum application was officially approved, opening a new door in my life. When Aisha asked me what I planned to do with the freedom I had so richly earned, I didn't hesitate. I want to serve God. I want to use this freedom to help those still imprisoned, just as I was. This answer became the foundation of my new life. I soon became involved with a human rights organization, where my task was to document cases of religious persecution and support other refugees who had also fled oppression. But despite the importance of my work, my most powerful testimony was personal. I was living proof that Jesus truly sets captives free. Every Sunday, when I saw those faces marked by pain and hope, faces that reflected a bit of my own journey, I remembered Jesus' words. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I do, and will do greater works than these. My escape from Iran was not the end, but the beginning of an even greater adventure. Learning to live as a free child of God and helping others find that same freedom became my daily mission. 2 years after arriving in Turkey, my life seemed to have found a rhythm I had never imagined. After so many days of captivity in Kermanshah, I had moved to Istanbul, where I began working at the International Foundation for Religious Freedom, coordinating global efforts to support persecuted Christians. My small apartment became a safe haven for newly arrived refugees who needed someone who understood their pain, their stories, and the delicate steps of starting over. But even with this peace and purpose, a shadow never left me. Miriam. Every day my prayers to her were fervent, and every night I wondered how she was doing in Evin prison. Then, on a cold February morning in 2024, my phone rang, carrying a voice that changed everything. "Sarah," said my contact from the organization. "I have news about Miriam." My heart sank. What could it be? Had she been released? "Yes," came the reply. "Early release for good behavior, and she wants to talk to you." That afternoon, via a secure communication network, I received the message I'd been waiting for 2 years. "Dear Sarah, this is Miriam. I've never, not for a second, regretted helping you. The 2 years in prison were difficult, but Jesus was with me every moment. I managed to memorize the entire Bible you hid before they took it from me." She said those words sustained her in her darkest moments. And she had something wonderful to share. There were other women there, broken by the system, but I told them about Jesus. "Sarah, 3 of them gave their hearts to Christ while we were together. Even in that dark place, God was at work." Miriam explained that she now works secretly with a network of Christian women inside Iran. Her escape and her story, which spread internationally, gave hope to many others. Some found the courage to convert. Others gained the strength to resist. "I can't escape like you did. The surveillance is more intense now. But I can be a light wherever I am. Jesus called me to be a missionary in my own land, despite the dangers it entailed." When I finished reading Miriam's message, tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. She not only survived, but flourished spiritually. Her time in prison turned into a missionary opportunity that led other women to Christ. I immediately wrote a response, telling her about my new life and the work I was doing. More than that, I shared how her courage had inspired my ministry, and asked permission to use her story in my international outreach. The months that followed marked a new phase in my calling. Inspired by Miriam, I launched the Faith Sisters Network, an organization dedicated to supporting Christian women in places where faith can cost everything. Our mission was broad: to distribute Bibles to underground churches, empower refugees as advocates for religious freedom, coordinate global awareness campaigns, and provide emotional and spiritual support to women who have faced trauma because of their faith. Miriam's story became a powerful tool for raising awareness in Western churches. Her testimony about prison ministry deeply touched those who listened. It brought tears and a genuine desire to act. Donations to Miriam projects grew rapidly, allowing them to support Christians who chose to stand and shine as light in places of darkness. A year later, I received another message from Miriam that surprised me even more. "Sarah, the network is growing," she wrote. "Now we are over 50 women spread across 10 cities. We distribute Bibles, hold secret Bible studies, and offer support to women living with abuse. But something new is happening. Remember my father, the Mullah who held me captive? Since I returned from prison, he has observed the change in my life. He has seen the peace I carry, the joy I maintain despite everything. Last week, he asked me directly about my faith. Miriam said she began explaining about Jesus, about a love that doesn't demand perfection, about a grace that covers all mistakes. Her father wept like a child. All his life, he tried to earn Allah's favor, but never found peace. He hasn't converted yet, and the path will be long and full of challenges, but now he's reading the Bible, asking questions, seeking. I pray every day that the man who once held her captive will one day find the same freedom Jesus gave me." Reading this dialogue between Miriam and her father, I was deeply moved by the irony and power of divine redemption. The man who was my tormentor is being reached by the message that set me free. God can transform any situation, touch any heart, no matter how impossible it seems. 3 years after my escape, as I prepared to speak at an international conference on religious freedom in Geneva, I reflected on the incredible journey of my life. It all began with a young student whose only crime was letting the wind play with her hijab. This seemingly simple decision led me through the valley of the shadow of death, but it also brought me to a place of peace, purpose, and hope I could never have imagined. For my speech, I chose to close with words that define my life today. The wind that changed my destiny that day was no mere chance. It was the Spirit of God moving, opening the way for me to find the truth that would set me free. My sister Miriam gave me a Bible when I was a bride full of fear and despair. That Bible changed my story. Today, my greatest prayer is that we can place that same hope in the hands of many other women, because the truth sets you free, and that freedom is worth any price we have to pay. May the God of hope fill with joy and peace all those who seek his face, even in the midst of persecution.